Okay, when we last left off, it was the final meeting, although they didn't know it. It was the final meeting between David and Shaul. This great chase that's been occurring. Shaul is constantly in pursuit of David, and for the second time, David shows Saul that he has no intention of killing him. And while Shaul is sleeping in the midst of his camp, David and his um, and his helper come into the midst of the camp. They bypass 3,000 soldiers. Everyone's schluffing, everyone's asleep. David takes the spear and the water from their midst, goes to the other mountain and says, "Look, I had the opportunity to kill you and I didn't. Stop chasing me. I have no evil intention against you." And Shaul cries and he confesses that he is wrong and he realizes David's righteousness. "David, that's you, my son," etc. And he shows great remorse. And it sounds like everything's going to go great now, right? Because if you look at the last verse in chapter 26, which we read last week, it says, "Vayomer Shaul el David." Shaul said to David, "Baruch atah b'ni David, blessed are you, my son David. You're going to do great, and you are able. You're confident." It's as if he's like admitting to him, "You're going to be a great king." So David went his way, Saul went his way, and they lived happily ever after. But that's not how it goes. The very next verse is quite interesting. In the beginning of chapter 27, that's where we are today, David says to himself, "Ata esefeh yom echad bi'at Shaul." Now I'm in danger. I'm going to be taken one day by Shaul. I better run. Ein li tov ki himaleti malet el eretz plishtim. I must run away and flee to the land of the Philistines. And then Shaul will give up hope from searching after me, because he's not going to search outside of Israel, out of halachic Israel, that is. Then imlatati miyado, and I will flee from his hand. In other words, he's saying, I'm going to go hide amongst the enemy. He's not going to pursue me to there. And even if he finds me, I'm going to be so embedded in the enemy, he's not going to be able to do anything to me. So I have to run away. And as he alluded to last time, when he said to Shaul, he said, it's because of the people who are speaking negatively about me that I have to leave Israel and go live in a place where it's as if I have no God, because I'm not under the direct providence of God. So sure enough, David goes to a place we've heard of before called Gat, and he goes to hide out in this place Gat, which is a Philistine city. That's verse number 2. Vayakom David vayavorhu v'sheish meot ish asher imo. Him and his 600 men, they go to Achish, the son of Maoch, the king of Gat. We know that he's been here before, actually. If you recall, I think of 5 or so chapters ago, David has already been in the land of Gat, but the first time he was there, he was on the run, and he had to pretend he was crazy. If you remember, this is the time where they said, "Oh my goodness, is that your enemy?" They said to the king, and they bring David before Achish, the king of Gat, and he has to pretend that he's an insane person. And you have that famous line, "Achasar mishugayim anochi," am I lacking crazy people? Why'd you bring this guy in front of me? It's obviously not David. David doesn't act this way, and he took him away from his presence. So what's David doing now? He's going to willfully return to God. He had to run away from there. So what changed? The Radak says that at least 2 things changed here. The previous time David went to Gat, he was on the run, it was on a whim, and he was an individual. He's not safe as an individual in the hands of the enemies. But now he has 600 men together with him. So he's not in immediate danger. He can kind of defend himself. And they've got some experience with war already, right? They defended the city of Keilah, etc. Furthermore, says the Radak, in addition to having 600 men, he also has a plan or an excuse. As we're going to see, David is running away from Shaul. He's going to present to the king of Gat, what seems to be, which is that he's rebelled against the Jews. The king is chasing after me. I'm no longer in good favor with the king. So Achish is going to think that David has rebelled, and he's a turncoat, and he's going to support the Philistines and not the Jews. And that's exactly the ruse David sets up. Okay, so that's why he feels safe now, because the king of God is going to think that David's on his side. Vayeshev David im Achish begat hu v'anashav ishu veito David u'shtei nashav Achinoam Israeli v'Avigail eshet Naval Carmeli. So David comes with his two wives. Remember, it seems like Michal is out of the picture. She was divorced and given to Palti ben Laish, or not divorced. They were never married, perhaps. And he comes with his two wives, Achinoam the Israelite, and Avigail. Fascinatingly, Avigail is still referred to as the wife of Naval, even though he married her. Like for context or something, it's telling us that she's the wife of Naval the Carmeli. So he comes with his two wives. And we'll come. Okay, so we're going to come back to this. The scene closes here. What's about to happen is the Navi is going to split into two screens. On the one hand, we're going to have David in the city of the enemy, the Philistines. On the other hand, we're going to have Shaul.
Before that,
yeah,
in my version here, it says that David dwelt in Gath, he and his men, each man with his household. So,
yes.
So where did these households come? I mean, he's been encamped in kind of battle ready, and now the 600, which could probably be 2,400 or more people, where did these other people all come from?
Good question. I mean, the impression that we've got until now is it's just a band of soldiers running around.
Right.
And now suddenly they have their wives and children with them. Just a moment. Let me see here. Oh, very good. The Malbim explains that's exactly part of the plan. If they would just come to Gat as soldiers, then they wouldn't be accepted. They would think that they're spies or that they're going to rebel against the king. They specifically brought their families to show, no, we're leaving Israel. We're planting ourselves here. This is not a military action that we're engaged in. We're coming with our families. Like, we'd like to move. We're leaving Israel. That was really the point. Wow, good point. Thank you. Nice find. This was part of the plan, and part of why David felt safer coming to God this time is because they're presenting themselves as traitors of Israel, and we're going to dwell amongst you now. We've brought our wives, we brought our kids. We're not going to fight against you. Very good. Okay, so Shaul, sure enough, it says it was told to Shaul that David ran away, and he did not search for him anymore. From this verse, we can already see that David was correct. He did not feel safe. He did not feel safe around Saul. He knew that the treaties or the good feelings would not last long. And from this verse, we see that the only reason Shaul didn't chase after him is because he ran away. Meaning, if he was still in Israel, he would have gotten chased after. So what changed? Let's spend a moment on that. Why, in fact, is Shaul continuing to chase him? And why did David know that this is going to happen? So on the one hand, we already saw that Shaul had repeated occurrences of loving David and then hating him again. But I think it's the Abarbanel who, or someone speaks out here that it's specifically now that David felt more fear. To the extent that David succeeds, it makes Shaul even more jealous and upset. So the higher that David goes, the more successful he is, the more you see that God is with him, the more that hurts Saul, the more that emotionally. It's one thing not to be the king anymore. For Shaul to lose the kingship, that's bad. But to watch somebody else ascend, that's extremely painful. It's extremely painful. One of the Mefarshim connects the section of the Torah which talks about the speech that they give on the front lines of war. And they say, anybody who planted a vineyard and did not get to enjoy the fruit, go back. Anybody who engaged a woman, didn't get to marry her, go back. Don't fight. Anybody who built a house, go back. And then the Torah continues, because maybe you'll die, and somebody else will take the wife, the vineyard, the house. Why does it have to? Maybe you'll die and you won't get to enjoy your stuff. Why did the Torah have to emphasize and someone else is going to take. And the Gemara, because the Gemara says that thought, Rashi explains it, that thought that somebody else is going to take my stuff is agmas nefesh, causes deep despair and distress. It's not just that you're not going to enjoy your stuff, but somebody else is going to get it. That's very painful. That's deep anguish. Yeah, that causes deep anguish. And that's something that the Torah wanted to prevent. So here too, Shaul is seeing, as he sees David rise, David realizes, it's clear that Hashem is with me now. I've been able to surpass the 3,000 soldiers of Shaul, take his spear, etc. There's clear signs that God is with me, and I know that that's going to frustrate Shaul deeply, and he's going to be hot on my case again. So that's why David was so confident that Shaul would chase after him, and he was correct. Okay, so I'm going to catch up over here. There seem to be messages. Oh, it's just stuff about my microphone. As far as I could see. Okay, let's continue now. We're on verse number 5. David says to Achish, the king of Gath, if I found favor in your eyes, please give me a city. Let me dwell in a city away from the capital. I don't want to strain your resources by living amongst you with my 600 men and their families. We're gonna dry up all. You're gonna get sold out of milk real quick. Give us some city off. Away somewhere. This is David, the wise negotiator, trying to get himself away from the king, out of the radar. So Achish says, okay, no problem. He trusted David, and he gave him on that day the city of Tziklag. Lachein, therefore, says the prophet, the city of Tziklag remains in the possession of the kings of Yehuda until this day. You may recall, in this, although it's wondrous if you do recall, Tziklag was a city mentioned in the book of Joshua. When it's listing the 39 or 28 cities of Yehuda, one of them is Tziklag. And what's interesting is here, we find that it belongs to the Philistines. Achish gave it to David. But in Joshua, it was one of the cities of the south that belonged to Judah. So which is it? Evidently, what happened was the Philistines had conquered this city, and they took it away from the Jewish possession. Yes, you recall, Shaul had gotten so distracted by his pursuit of David that the enemy kept creeping deeper, deeper into Israel, and they actually conquered one of the cities of Yehuda, which was Tziklag. And now, Achish, interestingly enough, is giving to David this city of Tziklag, which really belongs to David's tribe. He's giving him that city. It's an interesting name, Tziklag. Okay, Shmuel, you're firing off questions. We'll get there soon. I want to give you a quick reflection about this city. The Gemara says this city was actually a small one, not a major one. And it's specifically mentioned in the book of Joshua, amongst the listings there, to teach actually a moral lesson. The word Tziklag is like an acronym, a contraction of two words, Tza'akat Legima, which means somebody who has a complaint against somebody else that they took their livelihood. And the Gemara says, expounding on the names of the cities there, if somebody has a Tza'akat Legima, if you have a grievance against somebody because they took your livelihood, and you remain silent and you don't get into a fight with them, then the next city sounds like the word bush. The one who dwells in the thorn bush will come to your aid. Right? And from these three city names, Tziklag and the two that follow, the Gemara brings out this moral lesson. If you have a grievance against someone that they're taking your livelihood, and you remain silent, the one who dwells in the thorn bush will come to your aid. Interesting. What is that doing, and why is that the city that's involved over here? So I was just reflecting, it seems this is exactly what's happening with David. David, he certainly has a grievance against Saul. You took my livelihood. I have to live like a fugitive. I can't live amongst my brethren. You ruined my life. But he's only shown honor and respect towards Shaul. He didn't harm him, even when he has a right to, because he's defending his life, and even when he has the upper hand, and even when they're talking to each other. He doesn't want to one-up him and overcome him and put him down. David stays humble and modest and doesn't engage in the fight, even though he has a tza'akat legimat Tziklag, even though he has a grievance against him. To that, the promise is shochen basneh, the one who dwells in the thorn bush, will come to your aid. God is specifically referred to as the one who dwells in the thorn bush, like he appeared to Moshe, because God dwelling in the thorn bush represented that he felt the pain, the thorns of the Jewish people, so to speak. Just like they were suffering at the time, so too God suffered with them. Similarly here, just as you are suffering, you have these grievances against Saul, I'm with you. So this was a beautiful kind of full circle thing that the city of Tziklag is coming specifically to David, who at this time is showing his humility and modesty and not engaging in battle with Shaul, but rather fleeing and staying on the low. Okay, that's, I think, a nice insight that I want to share with you. Okay. And the city remained in the possession of the kings of David. What that means is, although it's officially part of the territories of Yehuda, which means it can go to any family of Yehuda, not the royal family, because of this exchange that Achish, the king of God, gave it to David, it remained in the possession of the kings, and only the king's family had control of the city, and not the rest of the families of Yehuda. It's an interesting historical note. Okay. Fine. So now here comes David's strategy. What he's going to do is, David's living in enemy territory. He's living out of the king's sight, right, off in the city of Tziklag, away from Gath, like further south. So the king doesn't exactly know what he's doing, but he thinks that David has betrayed his people, and he assumes that David is going to make a living by being a marauder and terrorizing the Jews and taking their stuff. So he was half right. David is going to be marauding and fighting against people, but he's going to be fighting against the Jewish enemies. Achish is going to be thinking that he's fighting against Jews, and David's in fact fighting against the Jewish enemies. So let's see that play out. This is verse number 8 in chapter 27. Vayal David vanashav, David and his men went up, and they raided these three types of people, these three nations, the Geshuri, the Grizi, and the Amaleki, including Amalek. Because they lived in that area. And it says specifically that David struck their land, and he did not leave a man or a woman alive, and he took the cattle and the donkeys and camels as loot, as booty. Why didn't he leave anybody alive? The verse is explained because you can't have anybody around to tell Achish what's actually going on. Achish sees that the inventory of David keeps expanding. Okay, you're doing great. You're taking all this stuff from the Jews. You can't leave one of the enemy alive because they're going to reveal that David's in fact not fighting against Jews. He's fighting against Amaleki, etc. There's an interesting technical question here. You recall that Shaul was severely punished for leaving behind some cattle of Amalek, right? He lost his kingship for that. And here you have David fighting against Amalek, and it says that he took sheep and camels and clothing. He left stuff behind. How come that's okay? Isn't he doing the same mistake that Shaul did? Hear the question? Yeah? David's fighting against Amalek and he leaves some stuff behind. Hear the question? How come you're allowed to do that? Yeah, by Shaul it was misplaced mercy, as you wrote here in the chat. But so David, is he guilty of the same issue for which Shaul lost the kingship? So this is a fascinating technical discussion about the commandment to wipe out Amalek. It seems, and this is a piece of evidence, that it only applies to the nation as a whole when they're instructed to do so by the prophet. David here was not acting as the king of Israel fighting a national war against Amalek. He was acting as an individual, basically, just doing some skirmishes against enemies. This was not the official war against Amalek. The victim, the enemy happened to be Amalek. Can't say victim, yeah, but the enemy happened to be Amalek, but it wasn't the was no issue stuff behind, because that rule of wiping out Amalek only campaign to wipe Amalek. I just have to disable the ringer on my phones. Okay. Yeah. That makes sense? Good answer? You hear? In other words, if you or I are walking on the street one day, and someone